on this very hazy, fuzzy, and very humid day. What's interesting today? Well, today right away, I'm going to tell you about something you probably haven't thought about, and that is the world's strongest brands and the world's strongest branding. And before you tell me, hey, fix your camera, this channel is not about all the high production value. We're not interested in that particular aspect of making videos on this channel. We'll save that for other channels, for clients, etc. It's just my insights as a marketer for many decades, and if you happen to find it useful, well, bully for you. Fantastic. What I'm more interested in doing for you all is delivering information that is actually useful to you. And that means telling you about something that's actionable and sharing with you some insights that you might find useful as a marketer, or that you might find interesting as a consumer. So sit back, relax, and before you start attacking my comments, this is all good and well, consider what I'm saying, and that they come from a good place. It's all focused on you. It's all about helping you figure out what are the things that are happening in marketing and how that impacts you, whether you're a consumer or a marketer. You're going to say to me, what? A marketer is going to tell me things that may be of interest to me as a consumer? That's right, I am. And if you ask me why I'm going to do that, it's because I am a firm proponent and a long-time advocate and practitioner of being transparent and accountable in my marketing work. And maybe to a fault, I don't play politics at work, whereas I know many in the marketing field do, and that's how they get ahead. And I found that to be something I'd rather not do, to suck up and play political games in business. If you want to do inter-office politics, there's plenty of people who can tell you about how to do that. I won't. Doesn't mean I don't know about it. Just means I refuse to participate in that, because I find it to be usually a sign of a person's inability to be a great marketer. And maybe that's not so great for a person's career if they're looking to move up the ladder quickly. But if, like me, you enjoy marketing and it's something that you want to do for decades as opposed to years, as I've been doing it for decades as opposed to just years, then it is incumbent upon me to share that information in that way, because I don't find it particularly useful if you're trying to learn how to be a better marketer. If you want to be a better inter-office politic person, that's a whole different thing. Maybe I'll cover that one day, just as an exercise in sharing what I know about it. But I don't think that that's very useful for people who are actually actively trying to learn to be better at marketing. So, with that said, let's start talking about marketing and the world's strongest brands and the world's strongest branding. If you look at some of the world's strongest branding in today's market. Right, we're in 2023. So what are some of the brands that you might consider to be the strongest at this time? Right? If you start looking, for example, in the fields of tech, if you start looking at the different kinds of tech companies that are out there, let's say you're looking at, the big tech stocks, Google, Netflix, Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, all the ones that are heavily traded on the markets and that are basically the active liquidity for a huge chunk of the markets. What is something that they have in common? Right? Well, sure, they have lots of money. Yes, wonderful. What is something they had in common before they had huge amounts of money? They had an effort made on their branding. And that's how they got to have such strong branding. Right? And we'll go back to them in a little while, but what are some of the other really strong brands in the world? Right? The Olympic Games have the famous 5 Olympic rings, and that is a sign that is recognized the world over, probably more than any other. It's been measured many times to be the most recognized brand. Second is the UN brand, which is not a company that has trillions of dollars of capital reserve or stock market value, etc. It's an international organization whose memberships are paid by the members of the organization, and whatever money they have in their budget is the money that's been contributed to them by the member countries. And their logo, the UN brand, is known the world over, and in many ways that's not such a great thing, because it means that it's a necessary thing, as opposed to living in a world where we don't need an organization that basically takes care of dealing with constant conflicts everywhere and human suffering and strife and emergency relief, etc. Now, sure, even if there wasn't constant conflict, you'd probably still want to have very strong organizations that help with human suffering and emergency relief from disasters and things like that, because Mother Nature has a way of doing things and causes a great need for humanitarian assistance. But they are a useful negative brand, right, as opposed to a useful positive brand. Are there positive aspects to it? Sure. But is it a positive brand on the whole? No, right? The whole concept of it is it's an organization born out of need from a negative perspective, as opposed to a brand born out of need from a positive perspective, right? If there were no disasters, if there was not a constant need for humanitarian relief, there would be no need for a UN. And keep in mind, the world operated without a UN until, midway through the 20th century, right? Until some time after the League of Nations failed. So, if you look at it that way, the United Nations, for all the good that it, you might say it does, or for all the bad you might say it does, it's a negative brand, but it is a very, very strong brand. How did they get to be such a strong brand? Well, their membership is global. Their members are countries, and their membership dues are paid by those countries, and that sustains their budget, which places their offices into countries all around the world and makes it possible for them to be a recognized brand around the world, almost instantly, right? And over the decades since they've launched, they have become a globally recognized brand. Do they use their logo on, traditional advertising channels? Well, they do in some ways, sure. Do they advertise, to typical demographics? Well, yes, and in certain markets they obviously do. They do all kinds of marketing and advertising and press, public relations. So they do all of that. They just have a certain set of constraints besides budget, but they get a lot of pro bono inventory because everybody wants to help different organizations, and the UN is a regular recipient of pro bono advertising, meaning free advertising from a lot of different media outlets, right? Now, what about some more positive brands? Arguably, the Olympic brand is very positive, right? It promotes sports, it promotes international sportsmanship, cultural bonds, athleticism, and all that sort of thing. Fair play, and on and on and on. Are there, of course, conflicts within the UN, or arguments, not the UN, the Olympics organizations? Of course. And is it full of politics? Yeah, absolutely. I know about that all too well, unfortunately, but, happy to have had the experience. But the Olympics is generally a positive brand, and it is one of the world's most recognizable brands. How did they manage to get that way? Well, they managed to get that way by developing as an organization based around sports and sportsmanship, right? And bringing people together regardless of whether or not there are conflicts between those people's nations. And of course, at times there have been exceptions to that rule where certain countries were boycotted or banned, or other countries boycotted participating, or they were hosted in awful places, or rather in places at awful times when awful people were running certain governments, like when the Olympics were hosted in Germany under the Third Reich, when Hitler was in charge. So of course there's a lot of history there in the Olympics organization. They've had plenty of great experiences for the world to enjoy. They've also had some rather disputed events where not everything was hunky-dory, and you've had occasions where one nation or another would not participate for whatever reason. And so there was no shortage of conflict between the participating countries. But the athletes generally view the Olympics organization as a positive, in the sense of if they're talented enough to get to the Olympics, it's usually considered a high mark in a person's athletic career, especially if they're an amateur athlete, meaning if they participate in a sport that doesn't have a professional league and doesn't necessarily have any professional status for the participating athletes. And the highest level that they can really get to is the Olympics. And certainly the most recognition and the highest level of credibility that an athlete can usually receive is by participating in the Olympics. And the proof of that is over the last several decades, since more and more professional athletes from sports like basketball and other sports have been allowed to participate, like snowboarding and whatever. They've allowed more and more professional athletes to participate, and more professional athletes have chosen to participate in the Olympics, even though they were professional athletes, and they got around them with one loophole or another. And the reason that they did it is because they see the value in participating in an event like the Olympics, because the Olympic Games, without question, lend credibility to an athlete's career. So that is a strong, positive brand, and one that any athlete worth his salt would be delighted to participate in, usually. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, it's seen as a positive brand. And then there are corporation brands like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, right? Again, two brands recognized around the world. I mean, they truly have global reach. Coca-Cola is a brand you can find in pretty much every country. McDonald's is a brand you can find in a whole lot of countries. And both of them, despite whatever people might say about them, and they're not healthy, and part maybe what they're doing isn't so great sometimes with the environment, or whatever arguments people will throw at them, overall they are viewed as strong, positive brands because they provide products that people want. Right? Coca-Cola provides Coca-Cola and many other drinks, and whatever other products they happen to sell at any given time. But they're in the beverage industry for the most part, and that is at least that's how their brand is recognized, to be a market leader in the beverage industry. And as it happens, McDonald's is seen similarly by many people as a strong, positive brand that provides food in a standardized format that's global, or almost global. It's not really global, but they're in a lot of countries. And as they get into a country, it's very often seen as a sign of economic development for that country, because it used to be the case anyway, less now, but it used to be the case that countries that had McDonald's restaurants were typically countries that had a fairly good or stable or up-and-coming economy. Now they're a little bit more willing to expand into markets that may have a little bit of a tougher time with their economy, but overall it's generally seen as a positive thing if your economy is able to sustain McDonald's hamburger restaurants, because what it means is that people are making enough to eat at McDonald's restaurants on their salary without a problem. Now, the ironic thing is, in America, the home of the McDonald's corporation, where it was founded, McDonald's is viewed as very cheap, very almost low quality, but certainly very cheap. Maybe their quality's improved in the last decades. It depends on how you view it. Maybe their packaging has improved because they don't use styrofoam anymore. They use, cardboard or recycled paper or whatever, and they try to do something to be aware of the ecology a little bit more, the environment a little bit more. So arguably, they're better for the world at large now than they used to be. For a number of decades, when people would complain about their low quality products and their low quality packaging, and that it was causing a great deal of damage for the world with all their styrofoam boxes and everything else. And so they listened to their customers, and they looked around at the world around them, and they saw the reality of the ever-changing nature of society, and they made the corporate decision, the policy change, to stop providing their products inside of packaging that was helping to destroy the environment or hurting the environment, right? And they put more attention on recyclable packaging, and they put more attention on slightly healthier products, like promoting their salads a little bit more, or promoting their non-fried foods a little bit more, or promoting their alternative sandwiches as opposed to just hamburgers, focusing on their fish sandwiches or their chicken sandwiches, things like that. Which, again, you might say, well, it's still McDonald's. It's not exactly healthy food. Right, and in America, again, it's considered pretty low end, but it's considered a good value because, in theory, you can eat there for fairly cheap. However, they've also raised their prices recently a little bit, even in the US, and now there are people who, would have usually gone to a McDonald's to get the maximum amount of food for the least amount of money, who now might choose to go to another restaurant because McDonald's has decided to actually increase its prices. And in a noteworthy sense, they've done that a lot since the whole world changed as of a few years ago, when the world changed back in 2020 for all the reasons that it did, and the ensuing effect that had on the economies, including inflation, at the price of goods, price of shipping the goods, producing the goods, delivering the goods, selling the goods, buying the goods, everything's gone up, right? Yet they still have a very strong brand across the globe in all the markets that they're in. Again, they're not in every market, but they're in a significant amount of them. And so that's a strong brand, a very strong brand, one of the strongest in the world, right? And if you consider, again, how it is that they do this branding, a lot of times they'll spend money on advertising that they absolutely do not need, right? They're just running ads for branding's sake. They're just excessively running ads. If you're taking a subway or a bus somewhere, you'll see like 100 billboards in a train of McDonald's everywhere, and you just think to yourself, why do they need to run in every train, in every subway train car, 20 placards of McDonald's ads? What's the point of that? Can't they just put up one or two or three or four in this train car? Everybody will still see it. No, they want to put it everywhere to excessively brand, because that subconsciously programs into the brains of the people who see that about the brand. Even though they've seen 50 other branding messages from the same company that same day in other places, on street billboards, on television ads, newspaper ads, internet ads, you name it, right? They're very strong at branding, and they spend a lot of money on branding for ads that they literally intend not to get a return on, right? Great if they do, wonderful, but that's not the purpose, right? They're just psychological branding ads. They are moments of engagement, right? And Coca-Cola does very similar advertising type, where they will run ads that they absolutely don't need to, advertise. Like, do you not know what Coca-Cola is, right? You probably do, right? It's a soft drink, right? And it's basically carbonated water with sugar, right? And caffeine. And why do they feel the need to run excessive ads that aren't going to bring them a return? For the same reason. It's just branding, psychological branding, and that is one of the ways that huge corporations effectively manage to run massive branding campaigns to program into the brains of the people that they're targeting in the various countries that they're in. Now, if you look at what that means for huge brands like that, it means that they have a budget set aside for just pure branding ads that, again, aren't intended to deliver massive results, right? As opposed to if they do some kind of a standout one-off thing in front of a restaurant or a series of restaurants for a special event, or they do a special TV ad series or anything like that. They might sponsor the Olympics, right? They love sponsoring the Olympics, Coca-Cola and McDonald's, right? Or they love sponsoring other big events, huge sporting events, huge cultural events. They love doing that because they know that they're going to be seen by tens or hundreds of millions of people, sometimes billions of people around the world at the same time. And that has massive value for them in terms of marketing and sales, right? But obviously, those are among the world's biggest brands. So those are some of the world's strongest brands. But there are also other strongest brands, right? I mentioned before, Google, Facebook, Netflix, and so on. Those are some of the world's strongest brands in the tech sector, which, well, you can tell me, well, that's nowhere near as legacy, as storied a branding, family as something like McDonald's or Coca-Cola or even the UN or, the Olympics, right? But those tech brands are brands that people use constantly every day, right? Like the overwhelming majority of people that use the internet, which is at this point the majority of humanity, either because they have it on their phone or on a computer or a laptop or all of the above or some combination thereof, right? So these people, which are us, the human race, we use these tech brands daily, right? Even if we're not even aware of it fully. We don't necessarily think when we do a voice search on the phone, let me open up my Google Voice. You might just open it up and use it, right? Some people think about it, even a lot of people think about it, but a lot of people don't, and especially if they switch between devices from one year to the next. One year they might have an Apple phone, an iPhone, the next year they might have an Android, and so on and so forth. Next year they might have a Microsoft. Not many, but some, right? So the branding effect for the tech companies is still significant, and they invest quite a lot in their branding. But the kind of investments that they make in their branding are completely different from the kind of investments that a corporation like Coca-Cola or McDonald's would do. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the newer tech brands spend actually more time reinventing their brand. The older brands do it too, and a lot. But the tech brands will tend to edit and change their logos every few years even. Sometimes even more, and sometimes they'll even change them for special events during the year. Right? And they'll stick with a theme for a few years. And then they'll decide, well, it's time to upgrade the brand. Change it, polish it, refine it, whatever. And what you'll notice is that a lot of them start out with branding that looks a certain way when they begin, and over time changes, and usually in the beginning their branding has more details, and by the time they become a well-established brand, it'll have less details. And the reason for that is less is more. So if you're going to take anything out of this video, that's the 3 words to focus on. Less is more. And what do I mean? Well, let's see if you look at the original logos for Google, right? Or the original logo for Apple, right? Or even the original logo for Facebook. They had a lot more detail, right? Google had all those serifs on their fonts, right? Google was written with a font that had serifs. And now it uses very smooth fonts that don't have serif, right? And they used to incorporate all kinds of, wacky color schemes and everything into the word Google. And now it's a lot more corporate looking, less detailed, and all the colors are much more consistently minimized so that the impact comes from the least amount of elements, right? So you can even have just the G for Google or just the F for Facebook, and all of the color schemes that their brand represents are represented by that one character, right? So in the case of Google, you still got the red, green, yellow, blue, but they also have a lot of gray and black in the rest of the words, right? And the rest of the letters, etc. They've become a much more corporation in that sense, right? Because they're a global brand and they want to be iconic in that sense, and simple is better because it's easier for people to remember simple looking logos in many ways and to identify with simple looking logos, especially when those brands focus a lot on building apps and websites that are super popular. And so they want to make things simple for people to recognize on small screens, mid-sized screens, large screens, etc., and wherever else they run their advertising, whether it's billboards, ads in trains, ads in airports, ads in magazines, ads in newspapers, ads on TV, whatever it is, ads on their packaging and on their product boxes, and in the things you can buy in the store that have their brand name on it, right? Gift cards or whatever else they have. Those are all things that they consider when they develop and refine their ads every few years. And those are some of the things that they don't need to develop at a company like Coca-Cola, which, even if it has apps for various fun things that they're experimenting with, it's not an app-focused company, right? I mean, maybe you have an app for Coke or McDonald's to save a few bucks on some meals over the course of a month, or on some Coca-Cola special thing, or a game that they might have to promote something. But generally speaking, you don't think of Coca-Cola and McDonald's as app companies, right? They're not software companies. But the software companies, they do think of that, right? That's where they put a lot of their focus on, because it helps them to get the word out to more people with an impact that makes a difference and has a solid, measurable effect on their marketing KPIs and their business drivers. And so that is why a lot of tech companies spend a long time constantly refining their branding, constantly refining their logos. And this happens with not just the very biggest companies, but also with some medium-sized companies or some small-sized companies, right? If you look at the company I used to work at, Fiverr, which you might know if you're into marketing. If you're not, you might not know, but they're a company that basically has a bunch of freelancers making their services available on their website or on their app, and you can go in there and buy whatever services you need from their website or their app from these freelancers around the world, none of whom are employed by Fiverr, all of whom are just, selling their wares on Fiverr, and Fiverr just takes, some percentage of their sale as their revenue, right? And they have successfully managed to strengthen their advertising and their branding by slowly refining, not even so slowly, but refining the look and feel of their site, of their brand image, of their logo. I mean, you'd figure they can because they have so many logo designers, but they also have a very, solid team. At least they did when I worked there. I'm sure they are still today. A solid team of graphic designers who make all kinds of wonderful, logo changes, etc. over the course of the years, and they work with outside firms to do their branding development. And, they, like all other big tech companies that, want to go public or have gone public, they know the value of those things, and so they're willing to spend a fair amount of money, even hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars just for something like changing the logo. And sometimes the change is so subtle you can hardly even notice it, but they'll still spend a lot of money to do it because they realize the value over time of evolving their brand and making sure that their brand is recognizable to a growing demographic and a growing audience. And effectively, that's one very strong way to get more customers, right? So those are some of the ways that a lot of these tech companies are using branding as a very strong way to grow their businesses, and some of the ways that they make their brand strong in the first place, right? It's all about communicating the message of the company, including its values, its overall mission, its kind of how it perceives itself and how it wants people to perceive them. But you got to remember, branding and advertising and PR, a lot of it, although it's up to the company to disseminate a message and a brand and a look and feel and a user experience and values and everything else it puts forward, ultimately it's how the customers perceive that brand that makes all the difference. It's really up to the customers and what they tell people about the brand that determines how the brand is A, perceived, B, shared by word of mouth, and that is probably the most effective way that brands are redistributed, because people tend to buy things that they're familiar with, and they tend to become familiar with those things through the word of mouth of people that they know. It could be an online message, it could be a phone call, it could be a discussion in person. Generally speaking, people referring other people is one of the strongest ways that these brands are growing, which is why they're so keen on word of mouth marketing and on referral marketing, as well as on organic marketing, right? Just as much or more than they are on paid advertising through Facebook or Google or other channels, or media deals etc. Because while the paid ads have strong value and they're very measurable and they tend to bring results very quickly, they don't tend to be very profitable if you have to pay a high premium when you compare them to the value of an organic ad or a word of mouth ad that literally costs you nothing or next to nothing, because it's an unpaid channel or a non-paid channel. Right? You create the organic media, you post it out there, it's out there. You distribute something to somebody, they tell someone about it, that's word of mouth. That didn't cost you anything other than creating the content that they chose to distribute for you. So that's why referrals and even affiliates, but really referrals are so strong in terms of the value that they bring to these brands. Anyway, these are some of the thoughts I have for you today. I hope you found some value in it. And if you did, feel free to do all the things that people tell you or ask you to do. Sharing and liking and all that stuff. But also feel free not to. If you want to subscribe and stay up to date on whatever I post, whenever I post it, feel free. You're welcome to do it. Hit that bell so that you get the notifications when I post something new. But otherwise, hope you enjoyed this. And if you have somebody that you know in your circle that does marketing or branding and you think this might be useful for them, feel free to share it. Or if you want to keep it to yourself and put it to good use for yourself as a customer, consumer of these brands, to be aware of how they're marketing to you and what they're doing to try to show you that they have better value, by all means. If you're a marketer, you want to use it yourself, good luck. These are things that have lots of value. Take care.